There's a lot of things that are changing. Our whole world, to a degree, changed a bit in 2008 when the financial crisis hit. Now that's in the Western world, and Western Europe, etc., are the areas that are taking the impact or whatever, has meant that we've had to readjust. The arts has been a bit of a soft target because people think, oh well, that's quite comfortable, and a lot of people think, oh, it's quite nice things. They're not always challenged by the art or whatever, but it's always there. But when you do start sucking things away from people, or things start diminishing, all of a sudden it's, well, hold on, how important are the arts to us? And quite often, most people put it very highly. When I was at the Arts Council in the South East, and Rolls-Royce had just been bought by BMW, and they were looking to re-site it, because at present it was on one site with Bentley, which had just been bought by their rival Volkswagen. Now, I know this doesn't sound like art, but when it came to it, they had to decide where they were going to put it. Now, most people, natural thinking would be they need to have it where there's lots of transport links, where there is perhaps a city close by, and things like that. Where did they put it? Just outside Chichester. And in the Downs, basically. And what were the decision makers? Because they realised that they had to think, who's going to work for it? How do we recruit the top people we want? We've got to work against people who work in London, in Frankfurt, Paris, all the major cities. And what were the things that people liked there when they looked at it? They wanted good educational skills for their children and world-class arts. Now, we couldn't build a factory in the middle of London. I actually probably could, but basically the thrust of it was the site that was near Goodwood, which had a historic idea with motor racing, but the Chichester Festival Theatre and the numerous art centres around Hampshire were the things that drew people in. And it was the big sales pitch for getting the personnel, because people do business, not roads. And so they didn't really care how close the nearest hospital was, funnily enough. They didn't care about all the things that we're told have priority, when really it came down to education and the arts, which are very combined anyway. So are we really looking properly at what we're trying to deliver and what the status is that's actually held by the public? So in terms of the changes that we have, we've got to think, are we going to change with the arts in the way we deliver what we do? Are we going to stay comfortable or whatever, or are we going to reflect what's happening in a lot of streets, particularly in London, about protests against cuts, i.e. anger? 20, 30 years ago, we had anger running through the 70s and 80s with the industrial institutes that were happening, and the change of the economic drivers, where we went into a service economy, etc. Then we got a bit comfortable through the 90s, perhaps, and the 2000s. Maybe we need anger again. And anger, not just in saying, don't do this or whatever, but anger in, how do we reflect society now? What are the things that we're trying to do? Yeah, it's got to the point where graffiti art is comfortable. And it shouldn't be. It should be quite tense. And maybe that tensity, I'm certainly not going to say that starving the arts of funds will make it more creative, but reflecting anger in society might make it more creative. It might make us look at different ways of doing things. It might make us put different plays on the stage, look at different areas in which we want to portray and reflect what life is doing, whether it be in the style of exhibitions we use, whether it be the artifacts that we look at. Yeah, how soon will it be before we start using the balaclava as a sense not just of keeping your head warm or of terrorism, but reflecting the whole idea of the surveillance society. Some of the areas that art hasn't fully explored, they've been on the fringes, but we do tend to sort of think, are we just very comfortably in our little organisations, as I discussed before, if those organisations have a structure around them, they tend to look inwards about what they're trying to develop rather than outwards to what are people actually doing. And art should reflect life, so therefore we need to begin that thing about communicating with people, whether it be other artists, whether it be potential audience members, whether it be people who say they hate the arts, but don't realise that it touches them in so many different ways. I mean, to me, it's a human condition. It's not a human condition to actually have a hospital. It's a service. But But the human condition is we sat in groups when we were first, I suppose Neanderthals, I don't know much about history, but when we were Neanderthals in the caves, we grouped together as a society for mutual protection. We developed ways of doing hunting skills and bringing up children, etc. All those nurturing skills. We worked very hard on those things, and they were all about communicating. Hence, we had the first art galleries in caves, didn't we? Where people painted. We told stories around the fire. We made harmonics, the sounds in our voices, etc., to soothe people and to give them entertainment. The storytelling is most definitely about education and about drama. So there you have the arts in a microcosm around a campfire outside a cave. No hospital there, no road, no major office buildings. Yeah, it was quite simple, but the arts was there. So the arts is really much more part of the human condition than anything else. So I think that if we don't start putting art at the heart, and that's an awful way of using rhyming, but then we do lose something. And I think most people do support the arts, do want to actually participate in the arts, but I'm not so sure that the arts lets them. So I think there's a lot of way in which we've got to try and think, how do we actually do things? So, as I say, it's not about starving the arts, it's definitely about how do we make the arts respond much more lively and much more intelligently with what's happening. Well, I mean, training as in and as of itself is always important. I think it's about developing and learning your life skills, etc. So it also echoes back to what I was saying earlier about the communication. So there's a lot of things going on in universities, there's a lot of things going on outside, there's a lot of things learned through experience, and in that experience we have and in that experience we have a lot of things that we need to do. So how we actually try and reinventing the wheel is something that we do in the arts quite a lot, because we all look at a new way of doing marketing, a new way of doing getting audiences and things like that. Think, well, actually no, a lot of people have written about this before, lots of people have studied it and all that stuff, but we're not sharing that knowledge. A lot of things can sit on an academic shelf, gathering dust, a wonderful thing that's never got outside to anyone in the arts. And a lot of things sit on shelves that the Arts Council produced, that companies have produced, and they're sat on shelves, never come into the universities. The idea of actually grouping people together who have a good knowledge and understanding of how the arts operates, to one, pass on that knowledge, to develop that knowledge and to discuss that knowledge, but also to provoke each other about the comfort zones that we're all sat in. Because we're sat there thinking we know the answers to things, and actually the whole joy of life is that there isn't actually an answer to it. It's just a question of how do you actually work with what's there now, and that's going to change in a few years' time. So I think the thing is, we've got to start thinking about how do we provoke ourselves, how do we challenge our assumptions, and how do we move it to the next stage? Because there is always transition, and we in the arts can always sometimes be behind a curve in the way that places operate and people operate. So I think getting together basically with universities, with the industry itself, and with people who are potentially going to work in those industries, they're the ones who are going to actually excite what we do. Then, I think that when we get to something like the summer school, which is where we have some of the top people, as well as some of the people who are learning all their skills, when they get together, I think it's time people ask each other provocative questions and actually challenge whether we really do know what we're trying to do in the arts, whether we are just trying to deliver the same old, or whether we're trying to actually find a way of doing something that's new and different. And particularly when we have pressures on us to sort of say the arts is just the icing on the cake and all those sort of things. So it's that idea of getting a group of people who are really passionate about what they do and challenging that passion, channeling that passion and communicating it amongst each other, so that every time they meet they learn something new and then we move to another point. So that's what I think is the brilliant challenge of the summer school.